They thought they were untouchable. Wealth, power, influence, everything carefully built on deception. But no lie lasts forever. Under the dazzling lights of their grand engagement party, they laughed, oblivious. He held her hand, whispered promises, believing the past was buried. But Sarah was there, watching, waiting, and she had other plans. Months of secrets, hidden accounts, stolen money. The truth sat in her hand, sharp as a blade. And tonight, she wasn't just going to expose them. She was going to burn everything they built to the ground. One toast, one sentence, that's all it took. The music stopped, the room froze, and as his perfect world collapsed around him, Sarah just smiled.
Champagne, pricey cologne, and the polished veneer of pretend permeated the air in the great hall. Laughing came and went like waves, a symphony of hollow congrats and surface gratitude. People danced, mingled, and savored the kind of reckless luxury only those free from consequence could afford under the sparkling chandeliers. Unnoticed among the throng, Sarah moved like a ghostly whisper into the joy. She had been waiting for this, had seen it innumerable times, each rendition more exacting than the last. And now at last the stage was ready. She still recalled the day that had rocked everything. New Year's morning, when the world was meant to be bursting with fresh starts and quiet resolutions, had instead brought a terrible, gut-wrenching turn of events. The knock on her door had been unusual, the type that caused the hairs on the rear of her neck to stand before she even reached for the handle. And when she had opened it, the scene before her had been practically ridiculous in its absurdity, like a scene from a poor movie, one in which the protagonist was the last to recognize she had been duped. Her sister stood there, almost shining, the kind of brightness derived from a delight snatched at someone else's expense. And next to her sat Sarah's ex-husband, with his always beautiful smile, and the assurance of a guy who felt himself untouchable. Their fingers entwined like vines strangling something once whole, and the words that poured from their mouths had hardly registered before the weight of them crushed her. They held hands. They were attentive. She had not let herself break, not there, not in front of them, even though she had stood transfixed, feeling the earth tilt beneath her feet. Rather, she had nodded, pushed her lips into a shape like understanding, and watched as they misinterpreted her quiet for approval. But inward something had changed. Her chest had developed a deep, simmering fire that drove a clarity she had never known. This was not what it meant to be heartbreaking. There was war here. Sarah had worked in the shadows for months, gathering every bit of truth her ex-husband had painstakingly buried. He had always been adept at lying, sliding through life with a charm that covered the rot underfoot. Not even him though, nobody was flawless. She knew his routines, how he covered his tracks, where he hid secrets when he felt no one else was around. She also piecemeal revealed the truth, a network of financial fraud, false investments, and money stolen from individuals he trusted. It was all there, buried under falsified signatures and offshore accounts. An empire created on illusion and thievery. She had thought about her choices, balanced the gradual, wonderful burn of patience against the instant gratification. She had also finally opted for the latter. After all, revenge tasted finest cold-blooded. But here's a question for you. If you were in Sarah's position, would you have done the same? Would you have taken your time, ensuring every detail was perfect? Or would you have struck in the heat of the moment, letting anger take the reins? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you'd handle it. Now back to the story. Now, in the glory of their lavish engagement party, she could see the results of her diligence. Standing at the middle of it all, they drank in the illusion of security and reveled in the respect of their visitors. Her sister, in a tasteful gown, glittered under the lights, blissfully ignorant of the approaching retribution. And her ex-husband, so relaxed and sure he had won, performed the faithful fiancé with trained grace. Sarah let the moment elongate, and let them savor their pilfered delight. She wanted them to taste it, to feel it settle on their tongues like honey, right before it turned to ash. The time arrived when glasses were raised, the room quiet in expectation. Rising his champagne flute, he flashed the same smile that had once convinced her he was incapable of cruelty, and spoke of love, of fresh starts, of fate. Though the words came out as fake, the room absorbed them entirely since it thought every well-chosen sentence was true. Sarah brought her own glass up, her voice sliced over the air. Not loud but strong, consistent, infused with something that made the room motionless. Eyes looked at her, some inquisitive, some perplexed. And then she spoke, deliberately, precisely. There were not many words used. They were not required to be. One statement would have been sufficient to break through the facade and change the mood from joy to something colder, harsher. Silence greeted us first. A pulse. Two more. Then came the ripple, the widening of eyes, the rapid intake of breath, the slight change of weight as visitors exchanged looks, not sure if they had heard right. And suddenly the whispers started to grow clear. The smile of her ex-husband wavered, just enough for those who were observing to detect the flutter of panic. Her sister's face faltered, the first traces of uncertainty seeping into her well-constructed happiness. Sarah watched as truth descended upon them like an unrelenting hand, weighing them. She could see the computations behind his eyes, the frantic search for a means of escape, to turn the story before it totally collapsed. Still, there was nowhere to flee. Not today. A tentative but pointed question was uttered by someone in the throng. Another voice trailed and then another, charges hiding under the pretense of inquiry. Under the weight of what could no longer be hidden, the illusion was disintegrating. The first glass dropped, a little collision hardly worth compared to the devastation underway. Her sister inquired if it was true, her fingers shaking where they gripped his arm. Her voice faltered, and Sarah saw something real flickering over his face for the first time that evening. Concern. She left not to see the complete fall. It was not absolutely essential. The devastation done. The seeds of uncertainty buried so deeply, they would never be pulled out. The truth would blaze across everything in its path. She felt something she had not expected as she turned to go. Not triumph, not joy, but liberation. The weight of loss, of treachery, of years wasted, all lifted and taken away by the damage she had left behind. Outside, the evening was cool. The air smelled like impending winter. She inhaled deeply, the cold cleaning, refreshing her lungs. Her peaceful assurance that she had won took front stage, erasing the echoes of the party. She realized even more fulfilling than revenge itself as she turned away, leaving the carnage in her wake. She was free. As Sarah left the vast hall, dragging behind the anarchy she had started, the evening was chilly. She turned not to see the echoes of whispers and accusations still floating around. There was no necessity. The harm was done. And even after she left, the fire she started would still blaze. A slow, relentless breakdown. She strolled through the still streets, the fresh air cleaning her in a way nothing else could. She had borne the weight of treachery, the sting of dishonesty, the slow-burning anger threatening to overwhelm her for months, and suddenly all of it vanished. She ought to have felt light, freer. Benevolently, though, something restless stayed, something that murmured, "It's not finished yet." One was expected to find gratification in revenge. It was meant to close the wound and make the past little more than background. But she sensed something disturbing when she stood in the quiet of the night. There was just the strange serenity that preceded devastation. Since the truth was that retaliation did not undo what had been done to her. It did not repair the betrayal, or provide her with backoff from years lost on a man who had just seen her as a stepping stone. She had revealed him, dashed his engagement, destroyed the image he had so painstakingly created. Men like him did not, however, go down readily. They lied, they maneuvered, they clawed their way back, they turned into victims themselves. And Sarah knew, down below, that he would not go silently. She glanced through her phone while seated in her apartment early the next morning, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Messages poured in, some from friends acting out of concern, others from individuals loving the drama and yearning for specifics. There were then those from her sister. They first came out as incredulity. "Tell me it's untrue. You're lying. You did this only to hurt me. Why are you acting this way?" Then the messages changed as the reality of it set in place. "He adds you set him up. People claim you produced the evidence. You simply could not stand to see me content." Exhaled, Sarah laid the phone down on the table. She was supposed to expect this. Her sister had always been the kind of person who turned away the truth when it would have been uncomfortable. The person who persuaded herself that love could pardon everything, who favored imagination before reality. Still, this was not done over. Months of evidence collecting, file sorting, transaction tracking had gone toward Sarah. Her revelations last night merely marked the start. Still to come came actual devastation. She turned on her laptop and pulled up the assembled paperwork. All of it was there, painstakingly arranged, indisputable evidence of his crimes, financial records, offshore accounts, stolen money. Last night, what she had done had been intimate. With this, he would be totally destroyed from this. She paused over the email she had created weeks earlier, directed to a reputable writer who had been sniffing corporate fraud cases for years. Sarah possessed the absent puzzle piece. She had what the law considered, as well as what their social circle saw to bring him down. Her finger stopped above the send button. There would be no redoing her once she did this. He would be prosecuted rather than only humiliated, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed irrevocably. He would not be able to reconstruct or find any means to turn the story in his advantage. Also her sister? She would have to confront the truth, whether or not she wanted to. Sarah closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. She then sent with a quiet finality. The initial effects were clear. The headlines catch on like wildfire. Notable investor revealed in major fraud scandal, proof points years of money laundering and embezzlement. Former wife leaks papers proving financial crimes. His face seemed to be everywhere. Something else, not the polished, confident picture he had so deliberately chosen. A man collapsing from his own dishonesty. Paparazzi packed him full of questions. Former business partners turned away from each other. Officials started looking at things. Legal action started to mount up. There was nothing he could do to save the failing empire he had created. Sarah stared from a distance, her look uninterpretable. She ought to have been triumphant, superior. All she felt, though, was empty. One evening then, she heard a tap at her door. She knew who it was before she ever set it open. Her sister was there, her face a rainbow of emotions, anger, anguish, betrayal, red-rimmed eyes. She said, "Tell me it's not true," softly. "Tell me you lies, please. You did this only to hurt him, to damage me." Sarah looked at her, steadfast and unbroken. "You already know the truth." Her sister shook her head and gasped shakingly, "You destroyed everything." "No," Sarah answered gently. "I rescued you." Something unintelligible flashed in her sister's eyes. "For me, you did not do this. You carried on this for yourselves." Sarah refused to refute it. Silence hung between them for a protracted while. Then, without further word, her sister turned and left. Standing in the gateway, Sarah watched her vanish into the evening. She was successful. She had done as advised all around. She had deprived him of his authority, his control, his capacity for hurting anybody else. Still, a weird emptiness descended in her chest as she closed the door behind her. Her justice had come from revenge. Still, it had not brought her serenity. That she would have to discover on her own, she realized.
Sarah thought she had finally won, but deep down, she knew, revenge doesn't erase the past. It only writes a new chapter. And speaking of betrayals that cut too deep to ignore, Emma's story is proof that some wounds don't heal. They transform. One night, one Christmas, one moment that shattered everything she believed about her family. And if they thought they could pretend she didn't exist, they were about to regret it. Click here and see how Emma turned their holiday joy into a nightmare they'd never forget.